Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to be talking about my modding experience on the RTX 2080 Ti. And I gotta say, you know what? This so far has just convinced me that the decision to not I've had a whole bunch of people go like, "Hey BuildZoid, I'll donate if you promise to buy an RTX 2080 Ti." I am so glad I didn't commit to that, because my god, this card is so painful to work with. It's ridiculous. So the main issue, I mean, other than the fact that most of the modifications don't work the way they should, if you compare it to how they work on 10 series GPUs. No. That would be, that wouldn't be the main issue. The main issue with this stupid pile of garbage that Nvidia produces is the 1350 megahertz bug. Is a physical defect that I can't pinpoint because it happens at random. So, though I think it probably, it could be one of two things, because those are really the only two things that I've been doing with the card recently. It might be to do with heatsink mounting pressure, or it's related to flux residue on the PCB. One of those two things causes the card to get stuck at 1350 megahertz. You know, because that's that's totally normal. Jesus, I don't I don't get it. Seriously, I don't get it. How the card can get stuck at 1350 megahertz, because especially because I mean, okay, admittedly I use no clean flux, and you're supposed to work for 24 hours before, trying to turn something on, but so trying to turn something with it on. But nonetheless, it's just I've never, I don't have this problem with other cards, right? Other cards, yeah, so other cards work just fine, and then there's this thing, which yeah, that this thing just randomly, randomly it just doesn't work. So that's great. I've been really enjoying that experience. Other than that, what are issues? So this is a standard, my standard method of modding vCore control. So this overrides the ref in circuitry, and it's enabled with some switches over here. So basically, this disables software voltage control, and this enables potentiometer control. So that's how that works. You can't do both at the same time, because one of them actually this one is there to disconnect some stuff, and this one's actually to connect the potentiometer. So and the way it works is just, well, I might have been possible to do it with one switch, but yeah, no, it wouldn't have, because that's hooked up to a different portion of the circuit anyway. But it still disables software voltage control anyway. So yeah, so this is just, your good old-fashioned voltage control mod, except with the option to turn it on and off, which, my 1080 Ti's don't have that option, because I couldn't be bothered. But with this, the issue is that basically, if you put the card in manual voltage mode, it power throttles ridiculously hard. It power throttles if you set this potentiometer to 1.06 volts and you run Firestrike, then in Firestrike, you run Firestrike Extreme, then in Firestrike Extreme Graphics Test 1, so GT1, the damn thing goes to 1700 megahertz at 1.06 volts, and it's just power throttling ridiculously hard. And then it hits GT2, and in GT2 it runs at 2115 or even above 2115, because the card actually scales with voltage, believe it or not, a bit, within that sort of low, 1.0x volts range. Yeah, it seems to scale with voltage a bit there. The issue is that you power throttle like crazy whenever you try to raise the voltage. So then it goes into GT2, and there it eventually decides that, hey, you know what would be a great idea? To boost to 2130 megahertz, and then it crashes. So that's great. So GT2 runs with no power throttling, because it's not core intensive, it's memory intensive. But yeah, GT1, which is core intensive, power throttles crazy, and you lose 400, 300 megahertz to power throttling. So that's great. I'm a huge fan of that, and you might be like, oh, but you can, and the best thing is the software is reporting that we're only using 80% of the power limit. So it's probably tripping power limit on some, part of the current balancing garbage. But yeah, so, manual voltage control does not work properly at all. I think maybe if you had a custom BIOS that actually like lifted the software restrictions, then the voltage control could work. But as it is right now, I think you'd basically have to rewire the entire 12-volt power planes. And so I'll just take the card apart now, and we'll address the whole 12-volt power planes, because my God, NVIDIA, just their life is not hard enough designing, complex GPU architectures. No. Apparently, the PCB design department is extremely bored, and so they spent all of their time figuring out how to cram as much, well, how to make this PCB as complex as possible without actually putting any of that complexity into the VRM itself, because, that's a great way to spend your time. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's open this thing up. Man, Cryonaught is really good at holding dies down. Okay, so I have sorted out the die coverage issue, as you can clearly see, which I've done basically by, well, I'm using the centered mounting holes, and I've bent the screws inwards, so now it's actually centered properly, and the thermal paste spreads correctly, compared to the past. But so essentially, you can see that I've marked out some of these capacitors with Sharpie. And the capacitors I've marked out are hooked to that inductor over there. So this inductor is for that shunt, which I think is one of the two 8-pins. And those are so that's one 12-volt power plane on the card. And that's the only one I've been able to reliably identify, because all of the other unmarked capacitors are behind power balancing, except this one. That one's hooked up directly to the PCIe slot. Needless complexity for absolutely no bloody reason, right? It doesn't actually achieve anything as far as I can tell, other than the constant power throttling. But essentially, like if we zoom in on the card a bit, zoom, and I'm going to shift it down, hop. But let's just go over all the current balancing garbage that NVIDIA decided was necessary on a GPU. It's funny. I'm pretty sure a Vega 64 has a higher peak power consumption, and that thing doesn't even know how much power is going into the card through the 8-pins. Like, it doesn't even measure that. But, hey, anyway, so, and no, that's not really an issue as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, let's take a look at the... So, okay, so we have one current balancing circuit over here. That pile of garbage powers like that capacitor over there, and I think maybe this one. These three capacitors up here for the memory VRM, I have no idea what they're hooked up to. I've not managed to... well, no, they seem to be hooked up to, like, these two little MOSFETs up here, but I don't know which one's hooked up to what, and, like, yeah, so... They're just... I don't know. I don't know what they're connected to. I have no idea where that goes. I'm not sure where this crap is connected to. I assume it's connected to maybe like both PCIe and one of the 8-pins, or maybe like, not sure. There's like 4 different MOSFETs. I don't have a schematic, so yeah, but that powers some of these capacitors. Then we have like we have a little shunt here, a shunt there, a shunt here. Oh yeah, we have more power balancing crap in this area, which powers like this cap, and then there are these two in the middle. I'm not sure what they're hooked up to. No idea. I've tried really hard to trace them out, and it's just like, well, they're hooked up to something, and I have just no idea where that something actually is, because this is a multi-layer PCB, and NVIDIA decided that, you know what, it's not enough to have, just your 8-pin PCIe, and just hook that up to phases in a, reasonable manner. No. That would be far too simple. No, we need power balancing crap freaking everywhere. So that's exactly what you got. You got power balancing crap there. We have like, because the thing is like, so you have some of the more like complicated power balance circuits which have actual like inductors in them, but then you also have power balancing circuits that are seemingly like one discrete that are essentially like a couple discrete MOSFETs, like these two guys over here. That's some kind of power balancing, and I assume it's hooked up to the memory up there. But I don't know where those two are actually getting their power from. So that's great. So essentially what I've been thinking, if I wanted to really like override the power limit on this thing, I'm basically considering the idea that I'd just like, well, the simplest idea I've come up with so far is disconnect the PCIe slot entirely. So basically desolder that shunt and just disconnect the PCI. Add some extra 8-pin power connectors, because what I'd do after that was I was planning to basically just unify the 12-volt power plane, where I would connect like this cap to this cap to this cap to this cap, and I'd just connect all of them, right? Every single one of them, and the same thing on this side. Maybe run some power, like maybe run some extra wires on the back of the card to bring 12-volt power to there, because I'm not sure how thick the power plane going to here is, and I'm not sure that this 8-pin even has a connection to, like, I'm not sure that both 8-pins even have a connection to here, and one of them's probably through a current balancing circuit only, so yeah, that's fun. So yeah, it's just like, if you want to if you have a Titan RTX and you actually want to like disable the power limit, as far as I'm concerned, the easiest way of doing that is to just disconnect the 12 volt, like rewire the 12 volts completely. And just put it on one big blob of a, just put it all on one power, well, all of the power onto both of the 8 pins, and then add some extra power connectors, which actually, if you join the two 8 pins, you would basically be able to add like an extra 6 pin or another 8 pin, directly to them, and you wouldn't really have to worry about anything like anything complicated, with hooking it up. The main issue would be that you wouldn't be able to run two different PSUs for your 8-pin power connectors, but I don't know why you'd even want to do that, considering that you can get a single like 1200 watt power supply, and even on liquid or 1600 watt power supply, and even on liquid nitrogen, you shouldn't be able to trip the overcurrent protection on that. So, basically unifying the 12 volts on the entire thing, and then adding an extra power connector would be how I would deal with this stupid pile of garbage if this stupid pile of garbage was actually mine. But as it is, I'm working on this card for somebody else, and they want to run it in their daily system, so I'm not going to go that far, because I think that's just ridiculous, and the card is already bad enough already without me trying to hardcore override the stupid freaking power management, because yeah, it's stupid freaking power management. Anyway, so that's the front of the card, and you can see I've not really done much of anything on the front. To the back of the card, well, like, I've not done anything to the front of the card, because I basically, I went around marking out the capacitors, realized I have no idea how this thing is wired up, and that I don't want to mess around with it any further than that. So that was the end of that side. On this side, what we got is pretty simple. Well, I will be doing memory voltage control, and that is technically like that controller. And I forgot to zoom out. There. That controller is right there. That's memory voltage. Anyway, back on the card. So yeah, we have core voltage control. We have software control disable enable, potentiometer enable disable. That's just the usual way I've done that, except that this is actually re-enableable, which I don't usually bother with, because there's like a resistor you need to desolder otherwise, and essentially this replaces that desoldered resistor. Other than that, what I've done is I've added some extra capacitors to the memory system. I've added some extra capacitors to the core voltage. The ones on the core voltage, I have no idea if they work, because the voltage control is just kind of all over the bloody place. And I assume they're not doing much of anything. Though I actually did manage to get a pass of the card in Firestrike Extreme at like 2115 megahertz before I decided to do this video. So I don't know. They might be helping with VREL for maybe. I'm not sure. It's really hard to tell, because I can't put the voltage control manual to like do proper A/B testing, because it's freaking card power throttles when you try to do that. Anyway, and then you're not getting real frequency measurements. You're just getting whatever the card decides is adequate for the amount of power consumption you have. Anyway, so the core voltage stuff, I'm not sure that it helps. I think it probably doesn't, because it usually doesn't, but who knows. The memory voltage, on the other hand, so this card came to me and it only was able to run like 1300 megahertz max. As of right now, it's capable of running at least 1375, and I say at least 1375 because I've not checked if it crashes at 1400. Unfortunately, at those kinds of frequencies, it is now hitting like error correction pretty hard, but at least it's stable enough to actually run at those frequencies, because previously it would just crash if you tried to go that high. It would just crash outright if you tried to go that high. And so the conclusion from that is the addition of some 22 microfarad multi-layer ceramic capacitors to the memory chips, as well as these 3 aluminum polymers right here. That actually helps the memory overclock a bit better. So the conclusion from me on that area is that you can see how NVIDIA has all of these unoccupied capacitor pads for like the V-Core, and they also had them, under the, these caps are covering the map, but they're also under, for the memory VRM there as well. So the conclusion from me right now is that NVIDIA should have actually populated all of those, because it does seem to help memory overclocking at least a little bit. And this is a $1,200 card, and capacitors are dirt cheap. So I don't know why they're trying to save cost on those. Same thing on the front. You know, we have these there's two bulk capacitors just completely missing from memory power. And I think those could have probably been populated as well. So yeah, probably once I bump up the memory voltage, which that mod will be just implemented as a switch on and off. I don't actually plan to give it memory voltage control, just because that's a pain to wire up compared to just, you know, having the option to bump the voltage up and down. So the memory voltage up down bump, you know, that's probably going to make the card run 1400 megahertz plus, and it's actually going to be stable at like 1375 or something like that. So that's pretty neat. Also, if anybody's wondering, this thing does have GDDR6 memory chips from Samsung, which I guess is why it already ran 1300 before I went to town on it. I wonder how like Micron cards would behave with these kinds of modifications, because like my 1080 Ti's, 1080 Ti's are all Micron because GDDR5X is only made by Micron. But I had a 1070 with Micron memory, and that thing scaled great with, like, that thing picked up so much memory frequency from a cap mod that it was, like, I was really surprised. Admittedly, that thing had a single-phase memory VRM, but still, it's kind of ridiculous how much better the card got with just a memory cap mod. And, so this thing right here, memory system, you know, could have probably had a bit more output filtering. And it does make me wonder if, you know, maybe some of the custom cards, especially, say, the Kingpin edition, because that thing has a rather elaborate output filtering system for the memory VRM. I do wonder if that thing won't absolutely kill it on memory overclocking, even at ambient, because, like, as I said, like, this is on stock voltage right now, right? And in fact, the core is slightly undervolted because I made a mistake, but yeah, that's kind of so far been the experience with the RTX 2080 Ti for me, and basically, it's like a really annoying 1080 Ti to work with, right? Because you have all of the extra power balancing garbage, and it just gets in the way and behaves really, really stupid. But other than that, I mean, I'm excited for the memory mod, right? That's the last one I'm going to be doing, but the rest of the card is just infuriating. Like, I really wanted proper core voltage control, but at the moment you enable it, it just power throttles, so, you know. There's not really anything I can do about that, because, as I said, I don't really want to screw up the 12 volts. And, because that's potentially a ton of work, and then if, like, it's a ton of work to actually do that modification in one direction, and then doing it in reverse, if it doesn't work, is probably going to be borderline impossible for me. So yeah, that's fun, you know. Huge fan of working on this thing. And I had a few people suggest, hey, Buildzoid, you should get like an RTX 2060 so you can try, you know, work around NVIDIA's power balancing on a cheaper card. The issue is, I don't think the 2060, like, I've seen the 2060 PCBs, and they don't have anywhere near as much garbage on them as this does. I think the nearest you can get to a 2080 Ti PCB is the 2080, because the 2060 and the 2070 are actually on the same exact, like, the PCB for those is the same. And I'm also relatively certain that a lot of the board partners aren't bothering with all of the power balancing crap that NVIDIA has. Like, they're just not bothered. Especially like MSI, and I'm a huge fan of that. Like, initially I was like, oh, it's MSI being cheap, and now I'm like, you know what, MSI, that's a good decision, because probably if you try to power mod an MSI card, it'll actually work, unlike on this thing. So yeah, that's kind of the story so far with the first RTX 2080 Ti Buildzoid Edition's development, and the development is slow and painful. So yeah, I'm like, I don't know why NVIDIA had to bother with all of the power balancing. Like, I still can't get that through my head. Like, nobody bothers with this, except as far as I'm aware, NVIDIA does now, right? Because it's like, you look at like say Vega. Vega just has three 12-volt power planes. There's the 8-pin 1, 8-pin 2, PCIe slot. There's no fancy you know, like extra circuitry to connect the power connectors differently depending on loading scenario, because that's basically what it's doing. Because ultimately the VRM has its own current balancing, right? So the output current, that's balanced by the VRM itself, by the voltage controller. But basically, like, because I've seen a lot of people, I guess, well, yeah, like, so what NVIDIA is basically current balancing is just like how much power is going through this connector, how much power is going through that connector, and how much power is going through this connector. And it's just like, I don't know why you'd bother with that. These can each take like, you could just set the power limit per connector to like 300 watts, and you wouldn't need any power balancing crap at that point. You just wouldn't need it. Because as long as the total power consumption, like if your average, like as long as your peak power consumption of the car, like, I don't think, oh, and then you could just make sure that your phase, actually, considering that NVIDIA has, like, the power stages running in parallel, right? So, like, I'm not sure how exactly it is divided up, but there's a bunch of power stages that, like, there's 3 power stages that aren't in parallel, and then the rest are. Yeah, because that's 10 plus 3. But the thing is, it's like, so you have, like, 5 phases on here where you have 2 power stages in each of those 5 phases, right? So I don't get why they didn't, like, the easiest way to current balance that would be put your 3 phases on the PCIe slot, right? Or put 1 phase on the PCIe slot, the other 2 on each of the power connectors. And then for the remaining 5 phases that have parallel power stages, right? Put each of the power stages on a different power connector. That way when the whole phase turns on, right? Assuming the power stages are, you know, relatively matched in their, like, manufacturing tolerances, they'll pull the same amount of power from each of the connector. Right, like if like let's just say these two, like this choke and this choke, are in the same phase, which I think they might be, and then this power stage and this power stage are on the same phase as well, right? So if I connected this power stage to this 8-pin and this power stage to that 8-pin, well, when I turn on that phase, I'm going to pull half my power from each of the connectors, right? Half of the power going through that phase is going to be pulled from each of the connectors. So I don't know why you need all the other shit on the card. Anyway, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, which at this point definitely does not involve buying a 2080 Ti, because I hate this thing. You know, if you'd like to support AHOC, there's merch on Teespring that you can get, so like shirts and socks and posters. Well, no, there's no posters yet, but I do want to do posters. There's stickers as well. And there's also the AHOC Patreon, and patrons get access to the patrons Discord, where, you know, like, I don't really have a main purpose for it. You sometimes get extra videos on there. So, yeah, that's that for the video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye. Oh, actually, no. Huge thanks to the guy who sent this card in. That's the last thing I have to say. There. And where's the stop button?